Cuba was on fire. The 90-day victory swept across the island like a cane fire. The hacendados and the sacerocracia remembered what Ellis had done to La Casta Divina in Yucatan, to the Ladino elite of Chiapas. Those who had tied their fortunes to Spain fled, leaving smoke and ash behind, and Ellis wasted no time. Spanish military officers, administrators, and loyalist families were expelled outright. He was still haunted by Olegario Molina, by the rebellion that had festered under his watch, by the elite conspiracies, by the assassination of his mentor and Vice President John C. Breckinridge, by the wounds he still carried in his body. Cuba would not become another Yucatan. Those who swore allegiance were spared. Those his intelligence networks identified as loyal to Spain were not. Ellis had spent 12 years studying Cuba, its families, its rivalries, its hidden loyalties. He understood the fractures within the Ejército Libertador itself. Afro-Cubans, long marginalized even within the rebellion, faced an uncertain future. Ellis offered them something radical: resettlement in the burgeoning African territories under autonomous administration. Many accepted. But 50,000 hardened rebels remained. Men forged by decades of war that had killed nearly 20% of an island of 1.5 million. Men who knew only insurgency. And now they were under a new occupying force. But Ellis struck first. Within months, rebel networks were dismantled, not only by Confederate forces, but by former comrades who had chosen Ellis. Safe houses, supply lines, sympathizers, mapped, infiltrated, erased. Unlike Spain, the Republic was embedded among them. There was nowhere left to hide. Those who sided with the Republic were rewarded: land, titles, positions. Former rebels became the Confederate National Guard of Cuba. A new Cuban aristocracy was born. But Ellis was not finished. He remembered Chiapas, the lost generation of young men who had drowned the Yucatan in blood. That crisis had been answered with Article 13. Now it would be invoked again. All young men between 14 and 45 deemed high risk, unemployed, uneducated, criminal, orphaned, were conscripted into high-wage, high-mortality labor battalions. Railways in South America, mines in Africa, dangerous frontiers far from home. Over 130,000 young Cuban men, many from Oriente and Santa Clara, were shipped out, some enticed by wages beyond imagination, others taken against their will. Most would never return. Into the vacuum came over 150,000 immigrants from the Republic, the United States, and Europe: Irish, British, Austrian, French, Portuguese. Farms were redistributed, businesses reopened, cities stabilized. Article 13 did more than suppress rebellion. It reshaped society itself. Native women married immigrant settlers. Communities fused, identities blurred. The old Cuba, Spanish, rebellious, fractured, began to disappear, and a new Cuba was born. The 90-Day War proved something the world could not ignore. The old enemies, fighting side by side, were unstoppable. While the United States wrestled with insurgency in the Philippines, the alliance between Washington and the Republic only deepened, cemented by the growing bond between William Ellis and Theodore Roosevelt. They were kindred spirits, warriors turned statesmen, men who believed history favored the bold. But Roosevelt's connection ran deeper than politics. His uncles, James Dunwoody Bullock and Irvine Bullock, had not only helped architect the Republic in its infancy, they were members of the Ellis Foundation itself. Blood and industry now tied the two nations together, and the foundation was changing. After the steady stewardship of Louis Ginter, a new force took control. Charles Ranlett Flint, a financier already known in New York as a master consolidator, a broker of industrial mergers, a man who believed the future did not belong to those who grew slowly, but to those who acquired relentlessly. In his first years, Flint moved like a storm. He absorbed the Rosario Mining Company, tightening control over precious metals. He acquired Inman and Occidental shipping lines, opening direct commercial arteries to Asia. He began consolidating railroads at a scale never attempted: Erie into California, Houston, Louisville, and Nashville, Southern Pacific, Western Railway of Alabama, Atlantic, Valdosta, and Western, binding them together and linking them seamlessly to the Ellis rail networks of Baja and Mexico. The result was a continental economic bloodstream stretching from the American South through Mexico and into the Pacific. But Flint also saw opportunity where others saw jungle. The vast Chicozapote forests of the Yucatan, source of chicle gum, became the foundation of a new industry. He quietly acquired Adams chewing gum, Chiclets, Dentine, and Beemans, merging them into a single titan, Confederate chicle. Then came agriculture, partnering with the Boston Fruit Company and leveraging Ellis shipping, rail dominance, and existing contracts throughout Central and South America. Flint forged what would become United Fruit, an agricultural conglomerate stretching from Caribbean plantations to American supermarkets. Industry, logistics, agriculture, mining, woven together under one foundation that now rivaled the greatest trusts of the age. And the world noticed. The Republic was no longer a regional experiment. It was becoming an empire. While the Republic prospered, Mexico trembled. Industrial growth along the Yucatan frontier and the annexation of Cuba were seen by many young Mexican radicals not as stabilization, but as tyranny. Yucatan, Baja, now Cuba. Among the loudest voices was Ricardo Flores Magón. A devoted reader of the Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin, Magón believed Ellis's Confederacy was not pragmatic. It was imperial, a greedy, hungry beast. With Librado Rivera, Magón used their newspaper Regeneración to attack both the Republic and Porfirio Diaz. Diaz, once an adversary of Ellis, had settled into uneasy economic alignment. Stability flowed from Confederate investment. Railroads expanded, trade increased, the peso steadied, but corruption thrived beneath it. Diaz refused to relinquish power. Wealth concentrated, rural workers and indigenous communities suffered. As inequality widened, unrest spread like a fever. To the radicals, Diaz was not merely a dictator, he was a puppet, and Ellis, the puppet master. In secret meetings, a new movement began to coalesce. They studied the failed rebellion of Olegario Molina, who had nearly toppled the Republic years before. Proof that the Confederate beast could bleed. They whispered of revolution, and in the shadows of Mexico City and the deserts of Sonora, they formed their circle, young, furious, convinced this was their moment, and together they would slay the beast. For 5 years, Ellis remade Cuba. War-ravaged villages became rail-linked townships. Roads cut through cane fields and mountains. The Anti-Hunger Act carried grain, schools, irrigation, and rural clinics into the countryside. Where Spain had extracted, the Republic invested. And Cuba was where Ellis brought his family. His wife, Elise de Sinclair Ellis, and after years of miscarriages and stillbirths, their surviving son, William Etienne Ellis. The boy grew up among Cuban streets and sea air, close to his mother, watched by a population that saw him as their own. Meanwhile, the foundation surged ahead under Charles Ranlett Flint. In one of the largest industrial consolidations of the age, Flint assembled International Harvester in a deal exceeding $60 million, absorbing McCormick and Deering into a single agricultural titan and outmaneuvering J.P. Morgan himself. But Ellis possessed what Morgan did not: henequen, the green gold of Yucatan, stronger than hemp, indispensable for binder twine, rope, shipping, agriculture, and global trade. Without it, modern mechanized farming stalled, and Ellis controlled the world's most abundant supply. It gave the Republic leverage over harvests from Kansas to Argentina. Yet Ellis did not want to merely dominate markets. He wanted to dominate the future. He distrusted Thomas Edison, too territorial, too political. Instead, at the Chicago World's Fair, Ellis saw the future. Ellis found George Westinghouse, and through him, Nikola Tesla. He offered them something rare: freedom, financing, and distance from Wall Street interference. Land was secured in Baja, near the growing city of Los Santos, adjacent to a military installation that provided security and the privacy Tesla demanded. Westinghouse joined the Ellis Foundation outright. Manufacturing plants rose across the Republic. Power stations followed. Light spread across Yucatan, Baja, and Cuba, faster than in much of Europe. But while Cuba glowed and factories hummed, a storm was gathering in South America. And this time, it would not be contained by railroads or wire. In 1899, Cipriano Castro seized power in Venezuela as supreme military commander and president, ushering in a brutal dictatorship marked by plunder, corruption, and violence. Castro's rule was unpredictable and defiant, and he refused to pay his massive foreign debts to Europe. His reply to their demands saw him seize a British ship, arrest foreign citizens, and provoking a violent international backlash. In 1902, Britain, Germany, and Italy met with Ellis, who had seen his own mines confiscated and Foundation officials expelled by Castro, to discuss a course of action. Europe was restricted from mounting a military attack by the Monroe Doctrine, but the Republic was not. But British Prime Minister Arthur Balfour had deeper concerns. He had seen how quickly the Republic had taken Cuba with the United States, and how it dominated Africa with France. Britain, wary of the growing German threat, and seeing a chance to fortify its hemispheric position and create a new alliance, urged the Republic to act. Not just to help Manuel Antonio Matos and his 30,000-strong rebel army overthrow Castro, but to seize Venezuela outright, to annex it into the Republic and check Germany's rising influence in South America. President John Mosby supported the bold expansion. Flint cautioned against overextension, but acknowledged the opportunity. Agriculture, coal, steel, gold, pearls, land, influence was too valuable to pass up. Ellis looked at his family and then made his decision. With 30,000 men, the Republic invaded. Castilian fortifications and Castro's small navy crumbled beneath precision strikes. Supply lines were severed, landing forces encircled Caracas, and Castro was isolated. But unlike Cuba, Ellis had little time to study local terrain or factions. Matos's coalition of strongmen, brave but vain, frequently ignored orders, costing men and hurting campaigns with costly frontal assaults. In the Orinoco Delta, Castro's brilliant general, Juan Vicente Gómez, waged a different war, harassing Confederate troops and river vessels with snipers and artillery, sabotaging water and food, forcing brutal close-quarters combat in the swamps. His goal was not victory, but delay, stall Ellis's advances until Matos's unruly forces fractured on their own. But Castro's time had run out. Starvation and depletion hollowed his ranks. At the Battle of La Victoria, site of a historic 1814 clash, the dictator gambled everything to force Matos's rebels to unite under national pride. Instead, he led his men to slaughter. Defeated, Castro retreated into the mountains, his angry pleas for reinforcements unanswered, conscripting boys and old men in desperation. But at dawn, he escaped into the Andes, leaving a note that read, "I do not accept surrender, I accept survival." Gómez, recognizing the inevitable, surrendered to General Fitzhugh Lee. As Ellis marched into Caracas, he had a decision to make that could change the world. When Venezuela woke the next day, they awoke under a new flag, a new nation, a new destiny. But Ellis could never foresee the consequences that awaited him.